I want my sport to be better for everyone, want it to grow, riders to be safer, horses to be safer. I think we can do better in the sport.
Show jumping has a problem, but no one seems to want to talk about it. Dangerous course designs are putting horses and riders at risk. But the question is the industry looking the other way? Riders are told to tough it out or quit complaining. Officials move slowly, and speaking up is a gamble that could cost you opportunities, sponsors, even the horse you are riding. But Harry Charles is speaking up. He lit the fire to this conversation of safety after a bad fall in the competition arena here in Florida. Harry took to social media expressing concerns and calling for reform. Needless to say, it has caused quite a stir. At just 25, Harry's already an Olympic gold medalist, a 5-star Grand Prix winner, and one of Britain's top-ranked show jumpers. And now he's taking on a whole new challenge, changing the sport from the inside out. In this episode, Harry reveals the hidden dangers in course design, the history of reform in the sport, our resistance to change, and the systems at play that influence everything we see in show jumping, and some of what we don't. Harry knows what's at stake, because he is living it in real time. From growing up in an Olympic equestrian family to winning on the world's biggest stages to speaking up for reform, this episode is about vulnerability, honesty, and refusing to settle for the way things have always been. If you care about the safety, longevity, and future of show jumping, this is the episode you'll want to hear.
Dear Horse World, it's Harry Charles.
Harry, welcome to the Dear Horse World podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on here because there's been a lot of discussion online as of late. And I think on a topic that a lot of us in the horse world had never even really thought about. But before we dive in to the topic of two strides and what you took to social media to talk about, I thought we'd be first actually introduce you to the horse world, because I think a lot of people know who you are and some people know who your dad is, or vice versa. So why don't you share a little bit about how you came into show jumping?
Yeah, I was born into it, as you would say, to put it very simply. My dad was a professional. He had a very long, successful career. Started off for Ireland, ended up for Great Britain. I've grown up, at the same place I've lived since I was a baby, at home in Hampshire in England. On a farm. We walk outside, we're surrounded by horses in the garden, just horses everywhere. And it's not a job it's a whole lifestyle. It's the way I was brought up. I can't imagine even now a life without horses in them. So naturally just progressed into following his footsteps. He, tried to push me a few different ways. I've always loved sports as a kid, and I guess getting to combine sports with horses I just landed with show jumping, and having someone who had done it all before, it was just such a natural evolution to get here. So
you shared something earlier with me. Your dad is a legend.
Yeah.
And yeah. I remember watching your dad at the 2012 Olympics in London, and he is someone that I really deeply respect. But he said something when as you were coming up as a young rider, you shared something about how he felt the sport is now compared to how it was when he was riding. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think the whole him wanting me to be a golfer, that's pretty common. I've told the story a few times. I now, funny enough, love golf. When I'm not riding, I'm on a golf course. But at the time, I think he really wanted me to do it. And for him, it was already very hard enough back in 1980 when he was getting going, early 1970s. Family weren't into horses. He didn't have any money. He came from a family of 8 in Liverpool. Got a one-way ticket to Ireland and started working with Eddie Macken, who's been his hero his whole life. And it was already a very hard road for him. And I think Eddie did a lot for his career, got him going, started him off, and he was able to, take that and build an incredible career. It's insane if you can hear the whole story. One day I will get him to sit down and tell it all, because it's insane. That was already hard enough. And then now I think for recent years, especially, you see the price of horses, these big big farms going with many horses. Shows are really every week. I think in the past, we didn't have that many shows compared to what we have now. You can do a 5-star every week if you want to now. And to even just be in that top group of riders on the ranking, you need to be doing a lot of shows, therefore needing a lot of horses. And the cost is just, it's very high. Don't need to sugarcoat it. Oh, it's not, it's very high.
It is. Would you say that, and would you believe that your father would also agree that show jumping is not nearly as accessible as it was?
People will argue and say it, but it's not, to put it simply. There is ways. I do think, after being in America for a good period of time, it is more accessible in Europe as it terms to over here.
Yeah.
I think if I was over here, I would have struggled to get up and be as successful as I started in Europe. I found getting to shows a little bit easier in Europe. The cost between the two continents is pretty significant, mainly in regards to entry fees. But I mean, you compare a bale of shaving, a bale of hay.
Well, and I think it's validating because I think to many of our listeners, the cost of horses, let alone competing, seems almost overwhelming. We see a lot of discussion about that. So I think it's very validating to have an Olympic gold medalist say, I don't think that I would have been able to excel through the sport in the United States the same way.
And look, I'm only talking about my experience of my time here. Don't say it's not. Some people, it's a huge country. I've only been to very specific places in it, mainly Wellington, California. I did try on, but it stays the same. It's all 5-star level as well. So just for costs, I'm comparing 5-star America, 5-star Europe. Very different terms of cost. And this is a big country, so transport just to get the horses from one place to another is also very expensive.
Something that you spoke to just a moment ago is there's a 5-star event every week. That there are more 5-star horse shows and competitions for riders than there was when your dad was your age. So it's and I mentioned this to you earlier before we started recording, was it feels like competitive horse sport has gone from more like a golf format where you have a number of majors, and that all the top riders and all the top horses are really working towards those majors. And now the sport feels more like tennis, where you're actually chasing each other, that it's not. And it feels like the preparation and the demand on both horses and riders feels vastly different than it was when your dad was your age. What do you think about that?
I think I'd agree. You have the 4 majors, and they're slightly different, I think, shows to I don't know. I wish I knew a bit more about it back then, but from what I understand, it was kind of your big shows, and you'd really just have weeks to plan, train, get ready for those shows. Now, I mean, you can run around, you can do the globals, you can do the Rolex shows, you can do the Grand Slams, the Nations Cups in between, the World Cups, kind of go back to back to back. And, you can be coming up to Aachen, you'll be doing a show 5 weeks before, you're doing a show a week every week
leading up to Aachen.
And you're leaving those horses at home, going to the show, you're only really getting to ride on Monday, Tuesday. So it's like a constant traveling circus nearly.
It feels more like a hamster wheel.
So it's very hard balance. It's something I've really tried to work on the last years, is getting that balance right. What works for me and my horses. Like Romeo, for example, he did 7 shows last year, 6 before the Olympics, and it worked. I mean, it was the best he's ever jumped, and we had a gold medal to walk away at the end of it. So just finding that balance of, I think Martin Fuchs is a really good example, how he kind of plans his shows. You don't see him now that often every week at the shows, but when he comes to a big show, he turns up. His strike rate is pretty phenomenal. Yeah,
totally.
I mean, that's a dream. I think if everyone could do less shows and have a high strike rate, they would. It's just getting that system in place. He's also had those horses for a good period of time, so he knows them very well, which is also a great credit to him. Spending time really focusing on the horses you've got, learn to get the best out of them, what makes them tick. So I'd love to be able to, do a few less shows, and when I do go out, I go to win, and I go to do some damage.
It makes me think that top riders, 5-star riders like yourself, you actually have to fight against the reality of FOMO, just like the rest of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish I could say I was like, a lot of those guys. I can go. Some of those guys are just robots. They can go to a show every week. They stay the same.
Yeah, they're amazing.
I get burnt out. I get emotional when it doesn't start. Things start going bad. I'm like, oh my god, this is all going terrible. This is so bad. Or even when it goes good, your highs are so high. It plays on your mind, and I used to think of it as a weakness and stuff, and maybe it still is. I don't know, but I do take weeks off now after the Olympics, and I had a great week straight after in London Global. I won the Grand Prix straight away.
You did have a really good
So that was
summer.
the best month of my life. August 24 will go down as the best month of my life. And after London, I need a break. To enjoy this. I can go to a show now for the next 5 weeks, and I won't have time to look back and be like, wow, that was something really. And I took a month off, went away, just really reflect, and was like, that was incredible. Because also just before the Olympics, I had the broken wrist and wasn't sure I was going to be going to the Olympics. So that whole 2-month build up was like a roller coaster.
What was the advice that your dad gave you going into Paris?
He was really good. He's a hard ass, but he was soft. I think he saw I was struggling a bit, just more, you really do build up. This time it was only 3 years, but normally between Olympics, 4 years. And Romeo was really in the shape of his life, and I was so excited to go and thought this time we could really do something special, especially with going with Ben and Scott. And I've been so lucky in my career. I'd never had many injuries, and that was the first one I've ever had, but I broke something. And I was just kind of sat in a hospital room in Aachen thinking, there's no chance. This thing is agony. I cannot even move my thumb.
Really?
And he was good. He was, well, you never know yet. And the doctor said, well, you need 7 weeks in a cast. Don't listen to them. Don't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about. I said, yeah, they do. The doctors, they don't know what they're talking about. And he doesn't sleep at night thinking about these things. So we were straight in, a really good physio back home called John Harris. He actually does a lot of boxers. It's quite a common injury in boxing.
Yeah.
Because it goes down the wrist. And he said, I can have guys back punching each other within 2 weeks. We'll have you riding a horse in 4 weeks. And just not even just hearing that, if he didn't do anything, was enough. Just having so many positive people around me. Eve stayed with me the whole time. She was just echoed, I guess, what my dad was saying. Of course you were right. This is meant to be.
Yeah.
I'm lucky I had Dad on Romeo to keep him, because he's a hardy horse. He's not one you can just leave for a week and just pull out. He needs to constantly keep in his routine, his program. And Dad did that. He sees me train every day, so he was like, I know exactly how to get him going for you and keep him fit, healthy, in a great frame of mind. And just so many positive people around me. Georgia, my groom, was just like, yeah, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. I just kept hearing, I didn't hear one person say you won't be fine. And I think it's really just got to me. And I started using it as soon as I could. Even in the cast, this heavy Rubik's cubes. I wasn't solving them. I was just playing, just getting my fingers working, and it was getting all the muscles back working. And I got on him 10 days before, jumped around.
10 days before
10
Paris?
days before, I jumped around a small course, and then went 2 days later, jumped a slightly bigger course with the cast off.
Yeah.
It looked good, felt good, and that was it. We were away.
So after that experience, do you believe in sort of manifestation or positive affirmation?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You need positive people around you. One of my weaknesses, again, I can be quite negative sometimes about when something doesn't go. Ben can turn it, but not as quickly as I'd like to.
Yeah.
But my dad is the most positive person, like the most optimistic person you'll ever meet in your life. So just go and speak to him, and he will have you back up and running.
It does.
2 seconds.
It does ooze off of him.
Yeah, and he hates having negative people around him. So he will just not even bother if someone is negative. He will not want them in his life. He just can't work with it.
I wonder if that's one of his superpowers.
Maybe. One of his
Because
few.
this sport can really get you down if you let it.
It's so mentally draining. It really is. And I mean, the highs are so high, and lows are pretty
low.
Yeah. But I mean, I've been super lucky, and people will probably look and say, you know, you've won a bit for a young age. How can you have negative? But still, like, we're athletes. We want to win. We want our horses to have, you know, the best results, and we have a big team around us, so we don't want to let our teams down. And people put a lot of money, energy, time into you. You want to also do it for them, and if you feel like you're letting them down, it gets you down. So,
and I would say that, you know, as our platform, like the NF Plus and Noah Floyd platform, has really advocated for mental health and especially sports psychology, because it's not something that, even when your dad was competing, sports psychology wasn't even ushered. And I think it's a really important part of what we do.
Yeah, I've got to admit it, I've never done any sports psychology. I've lent into it, maybe looking at. I've also been pretty, you know, on my day, I'm always feel like I'm there in my mindset. I'm like laser focused on the task. But maybe dealing with results is something that's a bit harder than for me, even in the moment. I don't really get nervous, luckily.
That's a superpower.
Yeah, I don't get flustered. I have my plan and I'm stubborn with it. I can drown everyone out. This is just in the heat of battle. In other things in life, I can get a bit, but at the show with my horse, I'm just me and the horse. Nothing else matters. No one else matters. So I've always been quite lucky with that. I've never really looked into much for mental, I guess,
it's
sports
like
psychology,
mental management, sports psychology. There's so many, and like golfing, tennis are huge sports.
Yeah,
that rely a lot on sports psychology because they are so mentally heavy.
Yeah,
in terms of outcome.
So it's not something I'm against. It's just something I haven't got to yet. Yeah. Which I'm sure I one point.
Well, at 25, you got a long.
Yeah,
time.
and I heard McLean talking about it a bit in his clinics and stuff, and how much it's helped him. So, I mean, there's enough great success stories from it.
So, there's been a lot of talk, and I think now is probably a good time for us to explain. You had a pretty interesting start to the year.
Yeah.
Do you want to share a little bit with the listeners what happened?
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough to be out here in Wellington, and really nice group of some existing horses, some newer ones. It was just a national 145 on a Thursday morning. You know, wasn't trying to win a class. It was just kind of a training round for me and the horse, and came in. It was a vertical two-stride oxer double, a bit short, and on a very long run to it. And horse, he picked up in one stride, and we paddled and went down very hard. I'm sure a lot of people would have seen the fall, and was forwarded round on many platforms, but it was definitely the hardest impact and biggest fall I've had. And how I got up and walked away with nothing more than a couple of pulled muscles and torn ligaments, I do not know. But someone was watching over me that day, and I've had hundreds of falls in my life. You know, I've been riding since I was 8 years old. I fell off ponies, horses. You know, most of the time, 99 times out of 100, it's my fault. This was something that I felt was so out of my control, and I was really just a passenger. I was just waiting for this to go down, and it was one that, you know, shook me a bit. I normally straight back up on my horse the next day. It's fine. My fault, won't happen again. But this is something that took me. I mean, it's been a good 2 weeks now, and still a little bit nervous, which is not something I'm used to. I'm a bit like, it's because it could have been much worse, and I feel like I was very, very lucky. A lot of people I've spoke to, physios and doctors, were like, wow, that's incredibly lucky how you didn't break your neck. it just makes you think, one day you're doing what you love, riding, and then you wake up one day and that could be it. And it was scary. People probably think I'm being maybe a bit pathetic in saying that, but until it happens to you, you really have no idea.
Well, and you say that.
Yeah.
And I want to go there a little bit, because out of a response to what happened, you took to social media and you shared how you felt, which is,
I don't like those combinations. I think they don't really serve much of a purpose. They're a very easy combination to jump anyway. So it's not about it's too difficult. I find them too difficult. No, they're pretty easy to jump. One stride vertical ox is much harder to jump. Ox vertical and two strides much harder to jump. But just the risk these present is much higher, much easier for a horse to misjudge. So, and anyway, the distances are too short. They're not being properly regulated. And, it's nearly cheating the horses.
And so you took to social media and you shared your opinion about what you felt about this particular combination in competition.
Yeah.
And then your dad, Peter Charles, also took to social media, and he said, and I think I'll read what he shared here, because I think there's I think it's important to share multiple perspectives. And I know you're going to get a chance to do that as well, because you had a lot of riders respond to, and had course builders.
Yeah. And you've seen some of the names that responded. And
and there's been a lot of discussion on this side of the ocean and in Europe as well. So your dad wrote in social media, "Currently we're out here in Wellington with a nice mix of new and regular horses. Last week though, on our second week of jumping, something happened which has worried me for a long time.
It has, yeah.
Course builders making distances short in two-stride vertical to oxer combinations. Harry had a bad fall as his horse picked up in one stride. Although both horse and rider didn't get injured, both were extremely lucky. Harry rode it perfectly, and as Nick Skelton said, he couldn't have ridden it better. This brings up the question, why? So over 25 years ago, riders got together to ask for the removal of triple bars to be taken out of the middle of combinations or second part of a double. Why? Because on two strides, they could pick up in one, and even on one stride, paddled, resulting in bad falls. Nobody missed those dinosaur jumps." This is a very long post, and so I recommend, and we'll make sure to include in the link in the show notes, what the full extent of what your dad has shared here. But I think the second part that I found really interesting was the second part of his reading, which he said, "What's the solution?" And that's important, right?
Yeah,
when
you raise a thing, you can't go with you have to have an idea of a solution.
Yeah. And I think what your dad, Peter Charles, recommends here is really interesting. Have a minimum set distance it can be. This has to have a good tolerance built into it to accommodate bigger striding horses. Limit the use of verticals to oxer, two-stride to five-star course builders, or under their supervision as TD. I would certainly not use in a jump-off or speed class. Education of course builders to realize horses are flight animals by nature. Be fair and try not to confuse them by what is bad course design. This also has to filter all the way down the ranks. Everyone deserves the same attention to detail in course design. What a powerful statement. By the way, there are excellent course builders out there. You know who you are. I'm not talking about making heights or taking time allowed or angles easier or backing away from the challenges that the very best need to face. I'm on about not cheating the horse with one particular situation that when it happens, great riders and trainers have not found a reliable solution for, that even when ridden correctly, as Harry did, can have a bad outcome. And I'll finish with this. There's a lot in the heat of the moment in the competition. We cannot change like the weather. Quite rightly, the shadows or reflections of water, night classes, etc. But this is something we can be proactive with, make it better, and if small alterations keep more horses and rider combinations on their feet and not getting badly hurt while maintaining the integrity of the sport, and everyone from the riders to our precious horses and owners and hardworking grooms benefit, then I'm all in. Gotta love your dad.
Yeah, he's got away with words. He's got away.
At Connaway and Associates Equine Insurance Services, they understand how special your horse is. That's why I personally chose to work with them to insure my horses before we embarked on this epic journey across the country. I chose them because their agency writes coverage in 48 states. They also work with several A-rated admitted insurance carriers, so you have options and can select the insurance coverage that best suits your own unique needs. Having confidence in my insurance selection allows me peace of mind on this journey. I can focus on my horses and embrace these learning opportunities of a lifetime. Who better to trust with the insurance of your horse than a team of fellow horse people? Connaway and Associates was founded in 1992 by Laura Connaway, herself a Grand Prix show jumping rider. Laura and her experienced team have built a strong reputation as a reliable partner, building relationships through service, trust, and understanding. Explore www.connaway.net or call them for competitive, personalized insurance coverage options from their team of like-minded equine insurance professionals. How did that feel for you how did it feel when you came out of the ring and your dad and other riders said, hey, like, that wasn't a you thing?
To be honest, I can't really remember walking out the ring. I was pretty out of it, went straight to hospital. I kind of knew it wasn't a me. I knew in my head, I came in pretty slow. I was actually thinking, I'm a bit slow here. And it was more, then it kind of, I guess, turned to a bit angry. I'm like, wow, that could have killed me with no thought put into this design. I don't know actually who would call us designer. I don't want to blame one person in particular. It's not what this is. It's McLean came and said to me the next day, that was built very poorly on a very long run. So the horses gain momentum naturally.
Yeah. And
there was a few factors. Nick, he went and said publicly that was way too short, that combination anyway. And it was just something completely out of my control and unfair to the horse. And it just made me more annoyed is when I took to Instagram to write that post. And it was more of I wrote it in 2 minutes. I just really spoke my mind. Didn't think if people would pick up and run with it. And I guess when you put your opinion out, you're always going to be open to a lot of criticism, which is fair enough. People have their own opinions. Obviously, I have mine on this.
And I want to talk about that because what you and Peter and there's a course builder that also mentioned something, and there's a really important context here, which is when you look at the situation, this combination and this particular element has not been included in many competitions at the 5-star level.
No, and I think in a lot of the people who disagree and are coming for me trying to make the sport dumbed down and easy, and it will probably not affect you. This is a very, very specific technical element. It is not all combinations. It's, how many times we saw this combination used in the Global Tour Grand Prix last year? 0.
Right.
The Olympic Games, 0. It's a very, very small change. It's like when we took triple bars out of the combinations, you took them out from the middle, but you still allowed them to use them going in. We're still going to have 2 strides. We're going to have just a vertical oxer, which it's a pretty easy one to jump anyway.
Yeah.
Or, maybe we can't ban it. That's fine. If we could limit it, which honestly is probably nearly a better, limit it to these 5-star guys. But then that is a bit difficult because you draw the line, well, who gets to build it and I don't. Why is it one rule for some and one rule for another?
And one thing I'm seeing as a common theme here is so there's statements of don't discredit the horse, don't put the horse in danger, don't confuse the horse, which is the words that your dad used, which I think is really important because I think as the sport becomes more technical and more competitive, we have better horses, and this is something we were talking about earlier. So we have better horses, better breeding. The horse as an athlete is better in 2025 than they were in 1985. Course building is more technical. You can look at the difference between the courses, way more technical. So you have riding and the horsemanship, and that is the sort of one of the third measures. There's many measures, and won't go too much into it, but that's another measure. And I think it's really important that if they have to be able to grow at the same rate, but we can't control whether they do, because breeding affects the quality of the horses. Course building is about competition and about money and about influence, but also about the results. But riding, the quality of the riders is influenced by so many different factors, right? Yes. So asking for reform, asking that we modify proactively, and that's the word that I loved that your dad used, is what if we are proactive about certain things? It's interesting how this discussion's been met, because it almost feels like a bit divided.
Yeah, I mean, most of the responses I got, like 80%, I say very positive. A lot of people, thank you for speaking out. And then, of course, you got the other side where they think it's going to be too easy or whatever reason. Yeah. I mean, when you look back at courses from 30 years ago, you see how much they've changed. It's just evolution of the sport. Yeah. You know, I wouldn't like to go in on my horses I have now and attempt to jump those tracks. Yeah. No way. Yeah. I'd probably end up on my head. Yeah. I mean, if you can just make very small changes to make it just a tiny bit safer, it's never going to be completely safe. A horse can take off quite rightly anywhere. Yeah. But this is something that's been a well-documented issue. It's more common than other fences, and you make a very small change and you can eliminate it. I think that's a great thing for everyone. Another important thing to mention too is that this very structure is also, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but this was a similar situation that would happen to Kevin Babington. It's similar. It was similar in the fact it was a 2 strides, but it was not an oxer. It was, I believe it was an oxer vertical, 2 strides vertical, very short. And more of the shocking thing is 3 horses did the same thing in one class at that same event, which is, it's just so sad, the whole thing. And it got me thinking a lot in, like, is that what it has to take? Someone to have that again? Someone to die for people to be like, oh, yeah, you know, maybe this is worth looking at. Yeah. I mean, I was so lucky. If it had gone worse for me, would people have maybe been like, oh, yeah, he actually does have a point? Or So that's something I've been thinking of. And then, you know, I'm relatively young in the sport. I get that, you know, a lot of guys are way more experienced than me, and I don't disagree that they are. But I feel like I've been around it enough time to still know and feel like I have a leg to stand on when I, you know, address these concerns. You know, I want to be doing this sport in 30, 40 years. Yeah. And if we can just start making it a little bit safer now for everyone. People were wearing air jackets, which safety's been taken a lot more seriously. Yeah. Just like concussions. So, and the thing is, I'm not asking for a ground bait. We're going to completely change the whole sport. It's such a tiny technical aspect, but it's not going to affect the result. Your top riders are still going to win. You're still going to have the same world ranking, same guys winning every week, same best horses. Yeah. Just makes it a little bit safer. And I think what a beautiful invitation that in 2025, you have the ability as a young rider, as an Olympic medalist, and as a representative of the sport, to stand up and say, hey, this was my experience. And I think that's a really interesting point to say, well, what if I had if I'd really badly hurt myself, would everyone have a different opinion? Mm-hmm. But the fact that I was able to walk away. I'm back riding now. Yeah. Is that somehow measure the validity of your statement? Yeah. And I think, do you feel as an international rider and with all the accolades that you do have, do you feel that there is a climate for you to speak your mind? I would say in most cases not. I know a lot of guys who have different opinions on many things from the horse world. Would they go on and say them publicly on social media? Absolutely not. And I've been thinking a lot about it. It's something I've always kind of never really been too fazed by. But then again, people look at me like, why are you saying, like, why would you put yourself in that position open to. And I think it's maybe how I grew up with my dad. I stand up for what I believe in, and I will stand on that hill. If I believe it's in the best interest of the sport or for anyone,
Yeah.
And I think in the terms of why maybe a lot of riders don't say a lot about or speak up or stand up for certain things is, we rely on a lot of people. For example, owners, sponsors. A lot of people are too afraid to upset people. They're not going to like my opinion. They're not going to want to maybe give me horses, going to sponsor me. Like, I won't be able to get my career going if I'm not liked. So I better just stay quiet.
Keep my head down.
Which is fair. And I completely respect and understand that.
Yeah.
I was the same as well. I was like, I can't say this because this person won't like it. And maybe she knows an owner who will stop, maybe me getting some horses or opportunities. And I think I watched a couple of Carl Cook's like walking and talking things, and I'm pretty sure, I need to go back and check, but he kind of touched on it. Yes. He is very fortunate. He owns all his own horses. He has the position to go and say what he wants.
Yes.
But a lot of people are a bit afraid because it's upsetting people that can have a good influence on your career.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a big reason, and I completely understand it, but at the same time, it doesn't make me back away from it. I want my sport to be better for everyone. Want it to grow.
Yeah.
Want riders to be safer, horses to be safer. I'm sorry if people disagree with that, but I think that's a great thing, and I think we can do better in the sport. So
I think it's really interesting you bring up that the economics almost gets in the way of the truth. Because I might, in working in media, our platform, of course, has come across many times riders who have an opinion, actually speak really passionately about a topic.
Yeah.
But then when asked if they would make a statement, they say, oh, no, I can't do that. No, or I wouldn't, I'm not in a position to speak up about that. I've had situations in which the rider will say, I can't speak about it now, but I'll be able to speak about it in 6 months.
Yeah.
And they want to time it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it certainly makes me think, because at the end of the day, the safety and the integrity of the sport should stand above the economics of the sport. And yet the world that we live in, economics drives everything, especially if you're running a 5-star event every week all around the world. Those events cost money. But I think it's important that we have the mediums of social media, and that's what you use to speak your mind. And I think it's really refreshing that, and I'm really glad to hear that you had a lot of different stakeholders, both riders and course builders, come to you and validate your position, because it is a very vulnerable place to be. It's
not the nicest place to be.
Yeah. Did you feel a sense of vulnerability?
Yeah, I did. When Steve publicly quite disagreed with what I said. And a guy I really respect as a rider, as a person, what he's done for the sport, also stands up, speaks his mind about a lot of things, which is great.
Yeah.
But I think more people jumped on his statement and just kind of used it as a way to kind of attack me a bit. Like, you're a 25-year-old kid, you don't know what you're doing. Leave it to the real riders to like say what they think. So I was like, okay, wow, fine.
Yeah. And you have a gold medal in your pocket.
Yeah, I didn't bring that up, but I quietly knew, okay, I think I do half know what I'm talking about. Of course, I'm not as experienced as Steve or anything, but I've given this also a lot of thought. Like the last few weeks, I've given this a lot of thought. It didn't really put me off. I would do it again in a heartbeat. I stand for what I believe in, and I will happily debate anyone who disagrees. I mean, Frank Rothenberger, one of the greatest course builders in the world, messaged my dad with a great response. He said that was a brilliant article, completely agree. I don't build these combinations anymore. I mean, he's a resident course builder in Aachen. He'll be building the World Championships in 2 years.
Yeah.
I showed you a few names who have messaged me, and they're so. Again, also, actually, I don't know how the question was phrased to Steve. At the time he answered it, so I didn't get too. I wasn't really too. I kind of watched it and was like, oh, well, yeah, who's gonna get one?
But also, like, I think anyone listening would agree that change doesn't happen without a certain
of
sense
course
of
not.
tension.
And it shouldn't do either.
Yeah,
you should have a bit from both sides.
Yeah.
Maybe we can meet in the middle somewhere with it, which is also fine. But
it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Exactly. If we can maybe meet in the middle and find something that's just a little bit safer, then it's a great start. What's
important, I think, in hearing what you've shared, Harry, is there are a lot of different people in the horse world from all walks of life, not just in show jumping, who regularly who feel a feeling, or they see something that's happening and they don't know whether they can speak publicly about it, whether they can stand up and say, hey, that's something that I disagree with. And so I think it's really important to create space for healthy discourse. And I'm wondering what you would say to someone who is listening to this podcast and maybe they want to speak out about something that they've seen, or they want to challenge maybe their local show for something that they've seen that they think is unsafe. Do you have any advice for them? Because they might say, well, I'm not Harry Charles. I don't have an Olympic gold medal. I don't ride at the international level. So who am I? Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't just go shouting from the mountaintops of one opinion. You have to do your research, look back at their facts, and really don't just go off a whim and be like, oh, I don't like this. Let's. I gave us a lot of thought and time, and went back, found loads of evidence to support it. Yeah. Really put myself inside the horse's head. Spoke to a lot of top guys about it. I mean, be really clear on what you need to, like you said earlier, come with a solution. Yeah. You can't just go yelling for chair. Well, I don't like this. Okay, what do you think we should do? I don't know. We should do something. You need to have a good idea of a solution, and it doesn't need to be an argument. Be calm, be productive, and try and get to a meeting point with the opposition. I think a lot of people just come and, like my statement, I wasn't arguing. I thought I presented it pretty calmly and constructively.
But also passionately.
Passionately, yeah.
Because you could have, I think what I felt when I read your statement was like,
I didn't blame anyone.
No, but you also, it felt really human.
Yeah.
It felt human, and it felt like, hey, this is something that happened, and this is something I'm concerned about. Yeah. And I'm going to share it with all of you.
Yeah. So I think having, a lot of thought into your whatever you might be passionate about or wanting to change, and have a good solution, and be willing to compromise and meet in the middle, I think is a great foundation. It doesn't really matter who you are. If you've done your research, you have good points, just bounce it off a couple of people first before you maybe, because you once you put it out there, you're always open to the bullets coming back. Yeah. So, ask your friend, bounce it off your friend. What do you think? Maybe someone who isn't your friend, who's a bit more neutral. That's my advice to, for those kind of guys.
And keep communication lines open.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that, when I witness your experience, and when we talk about open discourse in the horse world, no matter whether it's show jumping, whether it's competitive, whether it's non-competitive, I think encouraging all of our fellow riders to ask questions, challenge the status quo, put your hand up and say, hey, is that should this be adjusted and reformed? This is some of the rules that we have in our sports have been around for longer than you and I have been alive. Right. Yeah. So I think it's really awesome that we have an opportunity to invite consideration of reform or adjustment or evolution or modification. Because after all, that's all we've seen in the time that you and I have been alive in the sport of show jumping. It's changed drastically.
Yeah, a lot. Like I said, you go and watch the videos from 30 years ago, and maybe in 20 years we go and watch the videos of today's class and be like, oh, wow, that's changed a lot. Yeah. But it's just evolution. It's just the way the world works. things change and evolve.
And we must evolve with them.
We must.
To wrap up every episode of Dear Horse World, we do 5 rapid fire questions, which I'm really excited to hear your answers to. If you could read one book to the horse world, what would it be?
I don't even read books. I've just heard very good things about it, so let's put Peter Fredrickson's book in there.
Oh, yes.
I've heard very good things about it.
I have heard.
And I was actually been meaning to read it, so...
Okay, guys. Harry and I are both going to... We have it on our book list.
Book in there.
Yeah, Peter Fredrickson's new book. Okay. Who is the most iconic horse in history?
For me, in my time that I've seen, Explosion.
Oh, good pick. Most undervalued skill as a rider?
Patience. If you can call it a skill. Or a trait.
I think it's definitely a skill. Who is the greatest horseman in history?
Monty Roberts.
Yeah?
Seen the videos, heard the stories. Sounds insane.
Cool.
As a great general all-round
Yeah.
person on my ground, probably Monty Roberts.
Mares, stallions, or geldings?
I love a great mare, but I've had most of my success with geldings.
Awesome. Well, Harry, thank you so much for coming on the Dear Horse World podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I've really appreciated you coming on the podcast. I've learned a lot, and I think you have some amazing takeaways for our listeners. So I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, thank you for having me. It was fun. It was hopefully people learned a thing or two, or maybe not, but it was great fun.
Today's episode is brought to you by Connaway and Associates Equine Insurance Services. The friendly and knowledgeable team at Connaway and Associates brings together more than 30 years of experience to offer a wide range of insurance services, including horse insurance, farm insurance, and liability insurance. Visit www.connaway.net to explore options or get in touch today.